All right, so let's start digging into this one. Before we begin, what I'm going to be basing these on is the source that you can find on GitHub Code of Rig. This was done for some Patreon rewards, but this is not a bait and switch. You don't. They might be helpful, but you don't really need to watch the MPX node videos that are on Patreon. If you are, they could be useful. If you're not on Patreon, don't worry. This is not required. The source has always been available anyway. So if you go on my GitHub repo in didactic Patreon June, this has been available for a while. You're gonna find a bunch of files, and what we're interested in for the most part is the plugin CPP file. You could download the whole repo and you'll be good. Otherwise, you can look up what's in there. And we're gonna have a look at a couple nodes, sine and cosine probably. So those are the CPP files that you wanna have a look at. Now, another thing that you almost certainly want to watch before or as needed in conjunction with these videos is on YouTube. So if you go on YouTube, search for Code of Rig, get to the channel, go to the playlists. There's one called Compiling C++ Plugins for Maya. I am not gonna repeat everything that I've talked about in there. There's a bunch of stuff that is not really relative to the language itself, which is what we're gonna have a look at in this mini series, but it is instead relative to the toolchain, which is what's used to compile. I'm gonna refer you to those as needed. So let's begin. Now, the first thing that we want to do when we start working on a plugin for Maya is normally importing the modules that we need. Now, if these were Python, what you will be doing will be something like actually from Maya.api if you want to use OM2 without API. If you want to use just Open Maya 1, you will go import Open Maya as OM2. Then in there you will do whatever you need. You could inherit from things, or you could initialize the classes and so on. Now in Python terms, these from in this form requires that this exists in the Python path, so that when you do from Maya, Python knows what directory this corresponds to. Then a module or something, if this resolves into a module, something that is inside that module called API is supposed to exist. Now, if that path is found, then OpenMaya is imported, and ASOM2, which is optional, is basically aliasing that, so we don't have to write OpenMaya all the time, that you don't have name clashes if you have multiple things with the same name. And this is the first part where C++ and Python start. In fact, this is probably one of the parts where they differ most fundamentally. Python is very file-centric when it comes to modules. Modules are something that might be coming in probably like 3-4 years time to C++. They're not there the way modules are normally intended to be modules. But what you have when you're using some external API or when you're dividing your own code in C++ are headers, which are separate files. Now, this is where you want to have a look at the file types video in that playlist I mentioned before. But there's a couple things in here which are actually language specific, and this is these two types of include. So again, if you've watched those videos, if you haven't paused, maybe have a look at that to talk about files, because we're gonna start from there. So in Python, you would have your Python path determining where those files, modules, and so on are located. In C++, you would actually have a project, something, a make file, Visual Studio project, a CMake, whatever, that defines the properties for the actual toolchain to work, to find various things. And you will have things that are included, that are external to the files. So you would have source files, you would have header files. These are basically yours. And then you will have references, and you will have libraries and external headers and so on. Now, this is where these two things, this difference between the angular brackets and the double quotes actually comes into play. So when you have a pound, when you have a hash character in there, this is basically telling C++ what follows is a preprocessor directive, it's a preprocessor command. I do explain that in the actual playlist. include is one such thing where given a file or something that resolves into a file, it will basically copy and paste the entirety of the contents of that file in the one that you're actually working in, and it eventually resolves into a big lump of code that gets passed to the compiler. So the difference between these two is practically academical, but you will find both. Now the standard actually specifies that one of the two is for including headers and the other is for including files that are headers, and I believe that this is files that are headers. It actually doesn't really matter. Now, because you will find both, you probably want to know what they are used, or at least what people normally use them for. So when it's your own headers, you will usually find it as double quotes. So in this case, it's a header in my own project, and it will be in a special folder. Now my project starts from nodes 101, and under there there's headers. The file that I'm working on here, this plugin.cpp, is in a different directory. So by the actual standard, and I believe this is actually in the C standard, and the C++ standard picks it up, this is basically not really defined to start from anywhere. What happens is that almost every toolchain, in fact every toolchain that I know of at least, goes when you use a double quote, the first search mandate that is issued is start from the directory that you are in. So start looking from here. In this case, there's a double dot, which means go up one directory, then look for another directory like that, which will take me to headers, and then look for this file, which will take me here. If it cannot be resolved by traversing the actual file system, then it is actually looked for in what is included in the project. So in a way, these, if it cannot resolve as a file path with whatever directives are, with whatever standards your IDE or your toolchain or whatever works with, then it basically decays to these. Now, what is basically convention is that when it's your own headers, you use double quote. When it is something that you're including from an external library, you use the angular brackets. And that is pretty much it. That is all you need to know for the headers part. So let's stop it here for the headers and actually move on to something else. This is gonna be going in a drill down approach. So the next thing we want to scope out is it's a pretty meaty chunk, and it is going to be figuring out what these actually do.